My name is Vivian Achebe-Laurent. I am a United States District Judge for the Eastern District of Virginia. You need to verify that immediately.
Oh, I know exactly what name is on this address. And I don't care what title you think protects you. We have intelligence tying this house to suspicious foreign activity.
At 6:12 a.m. on Sunday, March 1st, 2026, the smell of pancakes filled a narrow Alexandria townhouse 3 blocks from the Potomac. Judge Vivian Achebe-Laurent stood at the stove in a cotton robe, flipping batter while her 7-year-old son Solomon sat cross-legged on the couch watching cartoons with the volume too loud. Upstairs, her 11-year-old daughter Nadia was already dressed for church, arguing through the bathroom door that Solomon had taken her hairbrush again. It was the kind of morning that didn't make the news. Quiet, ordinary, warm. Vivian was 44 years old, Harvard Law, top of her class. She had spent 6 years as a federal prosecutor at the Department of Justice before being nominated to the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Senate confirmed 4 years ago with bipartisan support. She carried an active caseload that included 2 national security matters and a high-profile civil rights case that had drawn attention from Washington and beyond. She was disciplined, private, and careful with every word she spoke on and off the bench. That morning, her church dress hung on the back of her bedroom door. Solomon's clip-on tie sat on the kitchen counter next to a sippy cup he swore he didn't use anymore. Nadia's Bible study notebook was open on the dining table, a colored pencil still wedged in the spine. Vivian had no idea that in less than 30 minutes, the front door of her home would be blown off its hinges, that federal agents in tactical gear would pour into her kitchen, that her son would be dragged off that couch and put face down on the floor, that her daughter would be grabbed by the arm at the top of those stairs, and that everything about this morning, every quiet, ordinary detail, would become evidence in one of the most devastating federal civil rights cases in modern American history. 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon in January, FBI counterintelligence analyst Craig Stenner sat at his desk inside the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, scrolling through the Bureau's online tip portal. Stenner was 36, competent enough on paper, but known among colleagues as someone who chased volume over accuracy. He flagged more tips than anyone in his unit. Most went nowhere. He didn't seem to mind. At 2:17 p.m., a submission caught his eye. It alleged that a woman living at 814 Braddock Lane in Alexandria, Virginia, had been making wire transfers to financial entities with suspected ties to Iranian intelligence. The tip included a name, Vivian Achebe-Laurent, a partial physical description listed as black female, early 40s, and a claim that she had been photographed at a restaurant in Georgetown with a known Iranian diplomatic attaché. There was no supporting documentation, no account numbers, no surveillance imagery, no name attached to the person submitting the tip. It had come through an anonymous portal entry routed through a burner email. Stenner flagged it and forwarded it to his supervisor, Special Agent in Charge Brent Kirkwood. Kirkwood was 52, a career bureau man with a reputation for aggressive case development and a deep interest in counterintelligence headlines. He read the tip once, asked no follow-up questions, and approved it for preliminary investigation the same afternoon. No one ran Vivian's name through the federal judiciary employee database. No one checked whether she held a government position. No one cross-referenced her address with any law enforcement or intelligence personnel records. The tip was vague, uncorroborated, and anonymous. It should have been flagged for further vetting at minimum, or dismissed outright. Instead, Kirkwood told his team to move fast. He called it a potential high-value lead, and from that moment on, every decision that followed was built on a foundation that no one in the Bureau had bothered to verify. Over the next 6 weeks, every safeguard that should have caught the mistake failed. Not one of them held. Stenner built the case file the way he built most of his cases: fast, surface level, and with just enough material to look thorough without actually being thorough. He pulled Vivian's financial records through a parallel channel typically reserved for FISA-adjacent national security requests, a move that bypassed the more rigorous internal review process. What he found should have told him everything he needed to know. Vivian had made recurring donations to a legal aid nonprofit that served immigrant communities, including clients from the Middle East. The transactions were modest, documented, and tax-deductible. Stenner flagged them as suspect wire transfers to entities with foreign ties. He never contacted the nonprofit, never checked its tax status, never noted that it had been operating legally in Virginia for over a decade. Then came the photograph. During a 2024 legal conference in Washington hosted by the American Bar Association, Vivian had posed in a group photo with more than a dozen attendees. One of them happened to be a mid-level Iranian diplomatic attaché who had been invited to a panel on international law. Vivian hadn't spoken to him individually. She didn't know his name. But the photo made it into the file, captioned as evidence of a potential clandestine relationship. A junior analyst in the unit, Priya Venkatesh, 29, raised concerns in a written memo. She pointed out that the financial records didn't support the conclusion being drawn, that the tip was anonymous and uncorroborated, and that no one had verified the subject's employment or government affiliation. Kirkwood read the memo, called her into his office, and told her to stay in her lane. 2 days later, her objections were removed from the case file entirely. Kirkwood told his team this could be a big one, and no one left in the room was willing to tell him he was wrong. The warrant application landed on the desk of a federal magistrate judge in the Eastern District of Virginia on February 26, 2026. The affidavit was 12 pages long and built almost entirely on 3 pillars: the anonymous tip, the mischaracterized financial records, and the conference photograph. Each piece of evidence had been framed to suggest something it did not actually prove. The charitable donations became suspect international transfers. The group photo became a documented meeting with a foreign intelligence-linked operative. The anonymous tip became a credible source with knowledge of the subject's activities. What the affidavit did not include was any mention of Vivian Achebe-Laurent's occupation. It did not state that she was a sitting United States District Judge. It did not note her prior service as a Department of Justice prosecutor. It did not reference her Senate confirmation, her security clearances, or her active national security caseload. The magistrate judge reviewed the affidavit, asked no clarifying questions, and signed the warrant that same afternoon. Kirkwood moved immediately. He assembled a full tactical entry team of 14 agents, body armor, sidearms drawn, flashbang grenades authorized. The raid was scheduled for 6:45 a.m. on Sunday, March 1st, a time specifically chosen because the subject would be home and, in Kirkwood's words, less likely to have outside support present. No one on the team suggested a less invasive approach. No one proposed a simple knock on the door. No one recommended calling her attorney or serving the warrant through the court. 14 agents, full tactical gear, drawn weapons, a battering ram, and a federal judge making pancakes for her children on the other side of the door. The operation was approved without a single voice asking whether any of it was proportionate. At 6:44 a.m., 1 minute ahead of schedule, the battering ram hit the front door of 814 Braddock Lane. The lock shattered on the first strike. The door frame splintered inward, sending wood and metal across the entryway floor. 2 flashbang grenades followed, one into the living room, one toward the kitchen. The concussive blasts shook the walls. Solomon, who had been lying on the couch watching cartoons with a blanket pulled to his chin, screamed. An agent in full tactical gear reached him in 3 steps, pulled him off the cushions by his arm, and forced him face down onto the hardwood floor. He was 7 years old. In the kitchen, Vivienne spun toward the sound just as 2 agents came through the doorway. One grabbed her by the shoulder and drove her sideways into the counter. Her face struck the granite edge. The impact split the skin above her left eye. Blood ran down her cheek before she hit the floor. She was forced onto her stomach, arms wrenched behind her back, wrists locked into handcuffs. She could hear Solomon crying from the living room. She could hear boots on the stairs. "I am a federal judge," she said. Her voice was loud and clear despite the blood and the pressure on her spine. The agent kneeling on her back didn't pause. "Sure you are," he said. Upstairs, Nadia heard the explosions and the screaming and came running down the staircase in her church dress, shoes untied, eyes wide. An agent intercepted her halfway down, grabbed her by the upper arm, and brought her to the floor beside her brother. She was 11. She landed on her knees and then her chest, her face pressed to the same hardwood where Solomon lay sobbing. Both children were now on the ground, surrounded by armed men in black helmets, in their own home, on a Sunday morning. Vivian lay on the kitchen tile with her cheek against the cold floor, blood pooling beneath the cut above her eye, her wrists locked behind her back at an angle that sent pain through both shoulders. Her breathing was controlled. Her voice, when she spoke again, was steady and precise. "My name is Vivian Achebe Laurent. I am a United States District Judge for the Eastern District of Virginia. My judicial credentials and identification are in my study. Second door on the left, top drawer. You are making a catastrophic mistake." The lead entry agent, Supervisory Special Agent Russ Pennington, 45, stood over her. For the first time since the breach, he did not move immediately. Something in her tone, in the specificity of her words, in the calm that no ordinary person under duress could manufacture, made him pause. He keyed his radio. "Command, the subject is claiming to be a federal judge, requesting guidance." The response came from Kirkwood, sitting in a black SUV parked 2 houses down, monitoring the operation on a tablet. "Continue the search. She can sort it out downtown." Pennington hesitated for half a second longer, then gave the order. Agents moved through every room. Books were pulled off shelves and thrown to the floor. Drawers were dumped. Closets were emptied. They seized both of Vivian's laptops, her personal phone, an external hard drive containing case research, her children's school tablets, and 3 family photo albums. In the living room, Solomon had stopped crying and gone silent, his small body trembling, a dark stain spreading across the front of his pajama pants. He had wet himself. Beside him, Nadia lay with her eyes open and her chest heaving in short, shallow gasps, unable to slow her breathing, unable to speak. A federal judge's children, face down on their own floor, surrounded by agents who still had not verified who their mother was. And in the SUV outside, Kirkwood checked his watch and typed a message to headquarters. "Raid executed. Subject secured. Proceeding with evidence collection." The noise carried. In a neighborhood like this one, where the houses sat close and the street stayed quiet on Sunday mornings, the sound of a door being broken open and flashbang grenades detonating was impossible to miss. Frank Oberlin was the first one outside. He was 68, retired Army colonel, lived in the townhouse directly next door, and had known Vivian for 3 years. He had watched her carry groceries inside on weeknights, had waved to her children when they played on the front steps, had attended the same neighborhood association meetings where she sat quietly in the back row, always polite, always composed. When he stepped onto his porch and saw the black SUVs, the tactical gear, and the agents moving in and out of Vivian's front door, he walked straight to the perimeter tape. "That's a federal judge's home," he told the agent guarding the line. "Her name is Vivian Achebe Laurent. She sits on the Eastern District bench." The agent didn't blink. "Sir, step back or you'll be detained." Oberlin didn't move. "You're making a mistake. I'm telling you who lives in that house. Step back. Now." Oberlin pulled out his phone and began recording. Across the street, Terrence and Simone Osei had come to their front window when the first blast shook the block. Terrence grabbed his phone and started filming from the doorway. The footage was shaky, but clear. Agents in full tactical gear, a broken front door, and then, at 7:03 a.m., the image that would later be seen by millions. Vivian Achebe Laurent, in a cotton robe and church slippers, blood visible on the left side of her face, hands cuffed behind her back, being walked down her own front steps by 2 agents, while a neighbor's child watched from a second-floor window across the street. Within minutes, the footage was in a neighborhood group chat. Within an hour, a local journalist had it in her inbox. Within 2 hours, it had already been shared more times than anyone in that neighborhood could have predicted. And not a single agent on the scene had yet confirmed who they had just raided. At the FBI's Washington field office, Vivian was placed in an interrogation room on the 3rd floor. The handcuffs stayed on. The cut above her eye had not been treated. Blood had dried in a thin line down her left cheek and along her jaw. She sat upright in a metal chair, still wearing her robe and slippers, and said nothing. She did not ask for water. She did not ask where her children were. She asked for one thing. I want my attorney. I will not answer questions without counsel present. I am a sitting United States District Judge. You can verify this in less than 60 seconds. The two agents in the room exchanged a glance. One left. The other stayed by the door, arms folded, silent. Vivienne sat still. For nearly 2 hours, no one verified her identity. No one ran her name through the federal judiciary database. No one contacted the Eastern District Clerk's office, which operated a 24-hour duty line specifically for emergencies involving judicial personnel. At 9:14 a.m., more than 2 hours after the raid, a junior agent who had not been part of the entry team typed Vivienne's full name into the federal court's personnel system. The result appeared in under 4 seconds. Achebe Laurent, Vivienne R. Title: United States District Judge. Court: Eastern District of Virginia. Status: active. Appointed by the President. Confirmed by the Senate. The agent stared at the screen, pushed back from his desk, and walked quickly down the hall. He found Kirkwood in a briefing room reviewing evidence logs. Sir, the subject is a federal judge. Kirkwood looked up. What? She's a sitting U.S. District Judge. Eastern District of Virginia. Senate confirmed. Active bench. The room went quiet. Every agent in it understood in the same instant what had just happened and what was about to come. Kirkwood set down the file he was holding. His face lost its color. Down the hall, in the interrogation room, Vivienne sat exactly as she had for the last 2 hours. Bleeding. Calm. Waiting. And somewhere on the 3rd floor, someone finally thought to ask the question that should have been asked 6 weeks ago. Did anyone check who she actually is? While Vivienne sat in that interrogation room for 2 hours, waiting for someone to confirm what she had told them from the moment they broke down her door, her children were in a separate room on a different floor of the same building. Solomon and Nadia had been transported in the back of an unmarked federal vehicle. No car seats, no seatbelts fitted for a child Solomon's size. No explanation of where they were going or why. Solomon had not spoken since the agents put him on the floor of his own living room. He sat in a plastic chair with his knees pulled to his chest, still in the pajamas he had wet during the raid, the fabric now cold against his skin. No one had offered to change him. No one had offered him clothes or a blanket or food. He was 7. Nadia sat beside him, rigid, staring at the wall across the room. She had stopped hyperventilating in the vehicle, but had not spoken a full sentence since being pulled to the ground on the staircase. When a victim's advocate was finally brought in, more than 90 minutes after the children arrived, she found them sitting in silence in a room with no windows, no toys, no crayons, nothing that acknowledged they were children. The advocate, a woman in her 50s who had worked with the Bureau for over a decade, later told investigators it was one of the worst things she had seen in her career. A child psychologist brought in that afternoon conducted preliminary evaluations on both children. Solomon exhibited signs of acute stress response, including trembling, selective mutism, and a flinch reaction triggered by any sudden movement or loud sound. Nadia presented with emotional shutdown, flat affect, and what the psychologist described as hypervigilant stillness, a trauma response more commonly associated with children in war zones. Vivienne was not allowed to see her children until 9:47 a.m., nearly 3 full hours after they had been separated. When she finally entered the room, still in handcuffs that had only just been removed, Solomon looked up at her and said one word: Mama. It was the first thing he had said in over 3 hours. By 10 a.m. on March 1st, the machinery of institutional panic had begun to move. The first call went from the FBI's Washington field office to the chief judge of the Eastern District of Virginia. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. The chief judge's response, according to sources briefed on the call, was a single question, repeated 3 times. You did what? By 10:15, the administrative office of the U.S. courts had been notified. By 10:30, 2 United States senators with oversight of the Judiciary Committee had received calls from their staff flagging an incident involving a sitting federal judge. By 10:45, The FBI Director's Office was alerted through an internal channels memo marked urgent, a classification rarely used outside of active threat scenarios. Kirkwood was pulled from the case before noon. He was told to return to the field office and not to contact any member of the investigative team. Stenner, the analyst who had flagged the original tip and built the case file without ever verifying the subject's identity, was placed on administrative leave effective immediately. His access to classified systems was suspended. Supervisory Special Agent Russ Pennington, who had led the tactical entry, was reassigned to administrative duties pending review. The DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility opened an emergency inquiry before the end of the day. Behind closed doors at the Hoover Building, the damage assessment was already underway. A deputy director convened an emergency meeting with senior leadership from counterintelligence, legal counsel, and the inspection division. The question he asked the room, according to two officials present, was direct. How did we raid the home of a sitting federal judge, put her face down on her kitchen floor, hold her children in a windowless room for 3 hours, and not one person in this building knew who she was? No one answered immediately. The silence in that room carried the weight of what everyone already understood. This had not been a failure of technology or access. The databases existed. The information was there. No one had looked because no one had thought to look. A black woman with an African surname living in a nice neighborhood had matched someone's idea of a threat, and from that point forward, every system designed to prevent exactly this kind of catastrophe had been bypassed, ignored, or overridden. And now the entire Bureau was going to answer for it. The neighbor footage reached social media before the FBI had even confirmed Vivian's identity. Terrence Osei's video was 43 seconds long. Shaky, slightly overexposed in the early morning light, but unmistakable. A black woman in a cotton robe and church slippers, blood on her face, hands cuffed behind her back, being walked down the steps of her own home by 2 agents in tactical gear. Behind her, through the broken front door, the audio captured a child screaming. The video hit a neighborhood group chat at 7:11 a.m. By 7:40, a local journalist had it. By 9 o'clock, a Washington reporter confirmed through court records that the woman was a sitting United States District Judge. The story detonated. Every major outlet ran some version of the same headline. FBI raids home of black federal judge. The footage played on loop across cable news and social media. Legal analysts called it unprecedented. The National Bar Association issued a statement calling the raid one of the most egregious violations of judicial independence and civil rights in modern American history. The NAACP demanded a full independent investigation. By evening, 14 sitting federal judges had signed a rare joint statement expressing profound concern over the treatment of their colleague. 2 members of Congress called for emergency oversight hearings. A constitutional law professor at Georgetown told a reporter she had never seen anything like it in 30 years of studying federal law enforcement. And in a windowless room at the Washington field office, the 2 children at the center of it all still had not been given a change of clothes. In the days that followed, the institutional rot beneath the raid began to surface. Investigative journalists filed records requests on Kirkwood's counterintelligence unit. What emerged was a pattern stretching back nearly a decade. Of 41 investigations opened by his team over 8 years, 29 had targeted individuals who were Black, Middle Eastern, or South Asian. More than half were initiated on anonymous or thinly sourced tips. Fewer than a third produced anything actionable. None led to a prosecution. Kirkwood's unit had operated under national security classification that shielded it from routine oversight. Internal review mechanisms deferred to his judgment. The result was a team with minimal accountability and a supervisor who treated aggression as ambition. Priya Venkatesh, the junior analyst who had flagged concerns 6 weeks before the raid, cooperated with the DOJ Office of Professional Responsibility. Her written memo questioning the case's evidentiary basis had been removed from the file before the warrant application reached the magistrate. Kirkwood had told her to stay in her lane. She had kept a personal copy. She turned it over to investigators on March 2nd. Separately, digital forensics teams began tracing the anonymous tip. The submission had come through a burner email created the same day, routed through a VPN. But metadata recovered from the portal's backend pointed to someone familiar with federal court procedures. Investigators began quietly exploring a possibility that would transform the case entirely: that the tip had been fabricated by someone connected to one of Vivian's active rulings. If confirmed, it would mean the FBI hadn't just failed to vet the evidence, it had been weaponized. As of March 2, 2026, Vivienne Achebe-Laurent has not spoken publicly. Not a single word to the press, no interviews, no statements on camera. Her attorney, former federal prosecutor Camille St. Pierre, issued a brief written statement on her behalf that afternoon. It confirmed that a federal civil rights lawsuit was being prepared. It requested the immediate preservation of all body camera footage, tactical communications, surveillance recordings, internal emails, and case files related to the investigation. It stated that both children were being evaluated by a trauma specialist and that the family was requesting privacy while they began to process what had happened less than 24 hours earlier. The statement was 4 paragraphs long. It said everything it needed to say and nothing more. Legal observers noted that Vivian's silence was not absence, it was strategy. She was a sitting federal judge who understood that every word she spoke publicly would be scrutinized, dissected, and potentially weaponized to paint her as emotional, politically motivated, or unfit for the bench. Her restraint was not weakness. It was the discipline of a woman who had spent her career inside the system and understood exactly how to dismantle its failures from within. Behind the scenes, her legal team had already contacted the DOJ Inspector General, the Judicial Council, and 2 congressional offices with jurisdiction over both the judiciary and federal law enforcement. The machinery was beginning to move, but Vivian had not yet shown her hand, and anyone who knew her understood that when she did, it would not be emotional. It would be precise. As of this moment, nothing is resolved. Kirkwood has been suspended from duty pending investigation. Stenner has retained a private attorney. Supervisory Special Agent Pennington has been reassigned. The magistrate judge who signed the warrant is under review by the Judicial Council for failure to scrutinize the affidavit. The FBI has issued a single, carefully worded statement acknowledging what it called procedural shortcomings in the investigation. It has not apologized. Congress has called for oversight hearings. 2 Senate committees have requested full briefings from the Bureau's director. Vivian's lawsuit, filed in the District of Columbia, names the FBI, Kirkwood, Stenner, Pennington, and 12 unnamed agents. It alleges violations of the Fourth Amendment, racial profiling, excessive force, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Nadia and Solomon have been added as plaintiffs. Their claims include trauma, unlawful detention of minors, and denial of basic care while in federal custody. No settlement has been offered. No disciplinary action beyond suspension has been finalized. No criminal charges have been filed against any agent involved. The investigation into the origin of the anonymous tip is ongoing, with digital forensics still tracing the submission through layered VPN routing. If the tip is confirmed to have come from a litigant connected to one of Vivian's cases, the scope of the scandal will expand from negligence into something far more deliberate. But as of today, none of that has been confirmed. None of it has been denied. The front door of 814 Braddock Lane is still broken. The blood has been cleaned from the kitchen counter. Solomon still flinches at loud sounds. Nadia still has not spoken a full sentence to anyone outside her family. And the woman who sat bleeding on her own kitchen floor in handcuffs is still on the bench, still hearing cases, still waiting for the system she serves to answer for what it did. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.